Hello, everybody. Thank you for your patience and welcome to the Sustainable Materials Management webinar series, a joint effort between the National Recycling Coalition and the Pennsylvania Recycling Market Center. My name is Wayne Bowen, and I'm the program manager for the Recycling Market Center and will serve as your moderator today. Today's topic is titled Business Fundamentals for Compost Operations, and our presenter is Jeff Gage, who you see there on screen. This is the third webinar of the three-part series that will address the planning, permitting, and opening a food waste composting facility. After Jeff's presentation, we'll have a Q&A session. So if you have a question or comment, you can use the Q&A feature located on your control panel on your screen. As the previous two webinars, this webinar will be recorded and made available for you for viewing via YouTube links on the National Recycling Coalition and the Pennsylvania Recycling Market Center websites.
So we're going to go through a quick review of the processing technologies, a conceptual design that I want to share with you. We're going to go through those financial factors for the facility design. We're going to talk a little bit about CapEx and operational expenses factors. We're going to go in and talk about design engineering company, what you want to look for and how to plan along with those. We're also going to be talking about how to engage with a facility with the permitting and the planning aspects, how those facilities, locations, and feedstocks interact with what you're going to be doing through permitting. Talking about some permitting best practices, and then finally go into some of the construction operational permit approvals, finally the commissioning. And then we'll have some Q&A at the end. So the first thing to do is to develop a waste capture plan. What that means is you're going to need to find what materials are available locally. Number one, hopefully for a tipping fee, the ones that you could get if it was a free unloading, and also the ones you might need for purchase for bulking materials. We're going to try to identify a processing fee for each so that you know how much expense you're going to have, and develop a cost per cubic yard, and then start looking at some of the competitive issues like landfills, other operations, and see if you can actually attract other tonnage. I'm going to point out at the bottom of the screen, there's a link for Craig Coker's BioCycle on April 25th of 2022. He has a whole series. This is the first part in a series of things to do, which is a great detail read for this presentation. Craig's been doing it for years, and I got this part just from him. So thank you to Craig. So the process facility, we kind of covered the key aspects of the facility's process and the flow in session 2. But here's a quick reminder, an example of a facility that we could use. This is a design for 41,250 tons per year on 4.5 acres that we'll use for the costing. It includes some scales that are right back here, and on the back left corner. And for the incoming material coming in, a completely paved surface, an enclosed building for capturing noise, dust odor, and reducing leachate production. And then also an outdoor pond for handling the stormwater, and a covered curing and screening production area so that any of the pond water that's received actually is unlikely to qualify as leachate, but you can either reuse this or treat and discharge. Remember, we also have to, once we know what our feedstocks are and what are available, we actually have to go through a mix calculator, which we covered. You'll need to understand your typical moisture content, your nitrogen, carbon, your bulk density, which is critically important for the incoming materials. And then you're going to be estimating a mix bulk density, and finally your totals that you have to handle. And here's where you're going to balance these feedstocks and make sure that you've got a mix that will work. Free airspace is another issue that we try to manage for. Then once you kind of know what your mix is going to be, we try to put that into a material flow mass balance sheet. And in this, we're going to be trying to look at the water loss, the actual mass that's lost to CO2 and heat during the composting process, and how things will increase or get more dense in their bulk density of the material. And so what we're doing is we're showing three feedstocks plus some recycled or new wood going in, making a total mix. That mix also has some water that's added if needed to. In our mix before, we showed that we could reach the moisture levels that we wanted to reach. So we're starting off at 113 tons per day. We put in a time factor of 15 days, and then we have amount of loss in mass and water and condensate that will be occurring during that time. And in the next stage, it shows now instead of 113 tons per day, it reduced down to 91 tons per day for another 15 days. And then finally into curing, and you notice it dropped from 91 down to 79 tons per day. That would be in there for 45 days. And finally, at the very end, we'd end up with the fines, the coarse, the overs going back over and being recycled back in either as a biocover or in the mix itself. So understanding these things so that you know what this finished product volume is going to be, both in tonnage and in cubic yards. So with that, how do you figure out cubic yards and how do you figure out space? Well, then you have to go through, say, okay, know my mix. I know that I'm going to receive material. I'm going to pre-process it, grind it up or mix it. I'm going to put it into a primary composting, a secondary composting, a curing, and a product location. And at each of these stages, since we're having shrinkage in volume, we need to actually understand what that's going to be at that time frame. So I take the tonnage, I put in the bulk density, and I calculate, I put in how many days I want it to be in that location. So I come into a cubic yards per day, a volume per location, and then I start dividing it by the height and come up with an area. I make these icons that I can now mess around with on a board so that I can actually look at what scale, what footprint do I need in a facility. So I make these icons to scale, basically using properties and making shapes a size that meets the 82 by 80 foot or the 15 foot by 81 feet. You can see all these different icons for each one. And then you put them into a layout. And then you're starting to create your idealized layout for looking for traffic coming in, adding in some ponds and having room for fire traffic to go around the perimeter, room for an office scale, room for a break room, room for a maintenance shed. And that then gives you a theoretical size. This is approximately 4.5 acres in relation to the size here. And we're going to try to make everything slope in one direction so that water from the fresh material doesn't pass by the old finished product. And so that it always slopes this direction. You try to get the wind so it's going away from your processing area and your screening area back into your product, so you can put up fence line and capture any flying plastics, etc. So let's look at kind of where do we end up managing for costs here. This is a list of a summary of the typical requirements and infrastructure considerations you're going to need to budget for. It's a long list, and you do have to pay attention to this and make sure that you understand the costs of each of these as you're going in developing your models. First is the purchase or lease of property. If you're getting a leased property, you probably want to have it for a long-term lease because any improvements, you have to regain the value back through tipping. You have to have engineering permitting costs, clearing, cut and fill and grading, electrical, your water, and your fire flow to the site. If you have it available, a municipal sewer or drain field, get the stormwater coming in, and, excuse me, and you're going to take the the leachate collection system, which would be a pond and or tanks. You're going to have internal roads and fire equipment that you have to manage for, have buildings for your maintenance, your employees, and for your office activities, and of course for the scale house. And for finished product outside, you might have bunkers, you might have biofilters. If you have an enclosed facility, you'd want to be able to treat the air, which takes a large biofilter. And you're going to want to look at your aeration floors, your ducting, all the things that you typically think of as the cost of your composting system. And then you also want to do one other thing, have buffers for visibility, making sure there's room for trees, room for the entryways, and staging going into the rooms here. So what is some of the CapEx that you also need to think of for your heavy equipment? Now, these are ranges. You'll want a grinder. They can be 250 to 750,000, a mixer, a loader, excavator, pre-screener, sort line, turners, a hose reel system for irrigating your compost while you turn if you are using a turner focused system. You definitely want to have some sort of a sweeper and definitely a pressure washer because you have to maintain the equipment and the roads. Have a product screener and also provide your plastic removal equipment. The product bagging equipment also needs to be there. And if you're going to be doing trucking in and out, then a fleet location, the fleet costs need to be in your models. We're going to be looking at the processing costs per handling stage. When we have a scale house, that's a thing you have to have people at. A pick belt, you have people. Grinders, mixers, turners, screeners, your product loadout, and your cleanup and maintenance. All of these require individuals. And whether it's a large system or a small system, you have to have all of their costs included. And they're kind of the same. So this is where having more tonnage and having the right number of people really is the balancing act that you're going to be doing in trying to put together the business plan. And we're going to look at how much capital cost there is, what your expenses are per year for each of these operations. And this is just round numbers. This is not necessarily size for what we're looking at, but if you have a turner, it costs money and you have to pay for the fuel, the maintenance on it, and you have to pay for the operator. So you come up with an operation cost per year. You can put it down to an hourly if you want to here in the next steps. So this gives us just an overview of where these cost centers are. Very tough to see on this screen. However, we put in each operation stage those general costs. You can see that grinding and shredding is one of the biggest costs. The next biggest is building the aerated static piles. And actually, typically, screening is a much bigger cost. It just takes more time. It's usually the bottleneck in most operations. So again, all this handling with loaders, that's where our big time frame is. And what those costs are in a year, it's nice to look and see where am I in this budget? Where can we pare down if we need to? And then we put our CapEx costs in and our operation costs, and we look at the overall budget for what's going on. You're going to notice the operations is usually quite large. And this is the worst one. Your loan interest is going to be quite large. So if you have equipment or you own the land, or you're already starting with some assets that you don't have to borrow money for, then this number can go down and shrink. Construction's only about a quarter of the cost. And then your composting equipment in the range of 15 to 20%. And so in this, you have to put together a lot of assumptions and then try to stick with it and know that if you have to change that, that's going to change your profitability. So the next step, after you've got all the data, the estimations, the expectations for the equipment, now's the time to create a real business plan. And what we mean by that is it's a profit and loss plan so that you can actually look at what's going to work and what isn't going to work under a variety of scenarios. Because here's where you need to really dig in. It's only 6 slides. You won't be able to read it. I'm going to describe to you what these sheets are and what goes into each one. So on this sheet here, we have a yearly, this is actually 3 years of startup time that we want to make sure is reasonably accurate with the assumptions that we're trying to model. And we put in how much increase in revenue there might be, increase in labor, increase in operating costs, and the SG&A. And all of there's about 5 other sheets that flow into this to come up with single numbers for your revenue, your labor, your operation costs, coming up with your net, adding in your overhead costs, your taxes that you would have to do, your earnings before interest tax level, and then finally your debt service with a net number that usually is a minus at the beginning because you don't have very much tonnage coming in. And you can put all these assumptions in by feeding in the following pages. And it comes up with, can I make money? And this is kind of the real business plan part of it. One of the worksheets feeding into that is your revenue generating activities. Here again, we do it on a month-by-month basis because we see fluctuations in the volumes coming through. And we're trying to look at our base year and a second year. It goes down into a third year also. But the goal is to learn what projected feedstocks you're going to have, add some penalties for, you didn't do your advertising enough or in the beginning and people aren't used to using you, those kinds of things to factor in, and come up with the competitive prices and how many tons you expect to be handling at what rate. Because it may be that you have to play with the money, the dollars per ton in yellow here, to actually come up with something that works. So this, you just plop it in and it populates that first sheet all the way through with the assumptions. So you can start seeing at what really makes a difference in a pricing, what prices you have to hit, and if you don't get them, what the consequences might be. The next is the operations costs. And in this one, I like to define what a full-time employee is. And so different folks have different wages, and we can put in their rates, their benefits, come up with a loaded cost, how many hours that FTE is. Some places might do 32 hours, but all of these things can be put in so that you understand kind of what those are going to be. We're going to then use them and have some seasonality. You might have different workforces at different times of the year. And then you also need to do the same thing for your equipment. So you list your equipment out, you put in how much fuel that uses, what the cost per gallon you're going to use for your fuel, and then the fuel cost per hour of operation, how many hours you're going to operate, and come in with the days per month that equipment's going to be operating, and look at not just the fuel use, but also the maintenance that you're going to need on it. So you can come up with the parts and hours that it takes to actually manage this piece of equipment, and coming up with a total operation per machine that can then flow into the spreadsheet. Then finally, no, not finally, almost there. We need to do our selling, general, and administration expenses, the SG&A. And this includes any of your safety equipment, advertising, utilities costs. It can be quite high. If you're running blowers, you're going to be in the thousands per month if they're big blowers. Telephones, we usually all use cells for this, but having the computers, your insurance liability, your health department permits, your air permits, all of these things go into SG&A expenses. And then you're also going through and looking at your debt. As you saw, it was a great percentage of it. And you have to go through a loan amortization schedule. You can actually use a spreadsheet that you put in the price, you put in the interest and the loan period and the number of payments per year that you're going to make and your start date. And it'll run through and give you a cost per month that you would put in for your payment, which then flows up into the main spreadsheet for your loan costs. So I know that was tough to see. If you want to pick it up to go through it later, that'll be something we can send to you, or you can get on the website at the Pennsylvania Recycling Commission. So going through on facility design and engineers. First of all, it is great to have a primary engineer, whether that is an architectural firm or an engineering, civil engineering firm. Having a coordinating engineer is really quite important, and there'll be a lot of subs going into it for doing your geotechnical work, for doing your survey work, going through and managing your grading surfaces, defining what the drainage is going to be, helping with all the information for your stormwater work. Um, with an architectural firm, you need that if you're going to put in buildings and structures. They'll also assist you with getting the fine tuning of the plumbing and electrical design. But always in a composting system, whether it's just an equipment provider and you're just going to do windrows, include an industrial processing design firm. And the reason for this is those are the folks who are going to put the whole manufacturing system together as a cogent whole so that you have the information you need for your permits, so you understand the amount of work that it's going to take to do the work that you're looking at, how much maintenance area they need. All these things are important for your production flows and really understanding what you're getting into. And you can either be your own general contractor or hire one and get one who's got some experience building and implementing composting operations. Believe it or not, there are more and more who have done that. We always like to point towards a few in different states that we've worked with and say, you know, these guys have done it before. You're not spending all your time training them. So you will need an engineering review for any land use, any development that involves stormwater, which they all will, a grading plan, which they all will have that, and developing that working surface and the structural calculations needed for having heavy equipment with point load sources on those front wheels of those loaders when they pick up are tremendous. Definitely get somebody out there, take samples of the soil and understand how much it can support the soil underneath. Some sites are great, some sites are really not so good, so you have to have thicker bits of concrete. And it's really great if you can get one that can do all of that work, but they're not as easily found, and they're also more expensive. But we do look at there's some very qualified firms out there now who can do your compost facility design. The other thing that I'd like to point out is sometimes you just want to get an environmental permitting consultant. Engineers do things well, architects do things well. There is really an industry in environmental permitting consultants, and there are some that are well connected in their local area. You may not know anything about the permitting, or you know too much about it and you just don't want to deal with it. These folks can actually get you through the steps and usually have the credibility that you need. So you can be your own permit expediter, but you have to then learn what the rules are, make sure everything that's going in the submissions is going to cover and meet those rules, and set that up. And the best way to think about this is no matter what, you need to have someone or yourself be transparent in their relationships with the people who are the agencies. They are out to protect the public, not you. And you need to understand what it is their job is so that you can help them be successful. So here's the parts for going in for permitting. The key planning parts is the facility technology type. Is that going to be inside or outside? Is it in vessel and large stockpiles? Is it an aerated static pile, turned windrow? Are you going to have pile covers? Are you going to use biofiltration? And then look at the feedstocks. We do have problems in our industry because the materials we handle smell typically. And that ick factor will work against you. And be clear what you might want for yourself as a neighbor. Design that into your technology that you're trying to accomplish, and make sure that you're making good decisions when you're putting your business model together so that you're not missing, hey, maybe this should have been indoors, or even if it is indoors, are there parts of the process that we want to manage differently. And then think seriously about the location. You may usually already have a location, but you definitely want to deal with the issue of distance. The farther away you are from the feedstocks, the more difficult it is to track those feedstocks. I've built facilities directly in the suburbs where all the yard waste was coming from, had to enclose it because it was near a lot of businesses, homes, and a school, several schools. And those are, even though it was a convenient location and we had a lot of feedstock, we had to go all out to fully enclose that operation. Still running today, 25 years later, without serious impacts. So location is really important, but also the local land use regulations. If there is no land use for composting, perhaps you want to go through and change the land use regulation, or just go in for a conditional use permit, which is almost always a tougher situation. And you want to plan and budget for those worst cases where you might even have to go through an environmental impact statement review, and there's going to be site disturbance reviews, you're going to have delays. This can take anywhere from 6 months to 4 years, depending on how you manage this part of the process. So get those permits in line, get the right people in charge so that you can actually get through this efficiently. There's a little bit of difference in the type of permit you need. In urban and suburban, you're definitely going to consider enclosing parts of your operation. That's to control the dust, noise, the vectors, meaning rats and birds, and odors. The indoor technologies are going to have to use a forced aeration system, some very efficient handling procedures, odor collection and treatment using biofilters, scrubbers, misters, dust control, a whole lot. And that's okay because you've got some advantages in reducing some of the transportation that it would eat up otherwise. So you might still be competitive. In agricultural areas, you might think composting is easy, but it's kind of a mix between the two. Mining, you might think it's easy, but again, it's not really mining. If there's already a solid waste handling permit zone, then you're golden. But these are where most similar site zoning locations, and you're going to be farther away from your feedstocks typically, but you might be closest to your biggest end user. And then the golden one, I just did a industrial zone permit planning. It was the easiest facility planning I've ever done. It was straightforward. They said, well, sure, this is designed for you. This is expensive land. So things have to be more concise, more compact, and thought through about how the process is going to move from here to there. You're going to use conveyors. You're going to try to keep things as contained and tight as possible. And you might also have a lot of organic feedstocks. There's a lot of food processing operations in these industrial zoned lands. So a little bit about permit relationships. Let's see here. We're doing okay. You're going to try to stay ahead of the permit requirements by proposing things that are compliant with those requirements. You're going to try to establish a transparent relationship with the regulatory authority and any third parties that you might need to be interacting with, be it a community group, neighbor group, and make sure that they know what you're doing and no surprises, and don't lie. So if your community doesn't have the regulations, you might need to go through and develop that. There's a sustainable city code link here that you can use, and hopefully these are the tools that you will endeavor to use prior to actually popping your permits in for review. So locating in the properly zoned area, you have to really push your water, air, and solid waste permits hard. And you don't necessarily need all of those at the beginning, but you need to be working on them all the way through. Typical timeframes for permitting is 4 to 9 months, but if the EIS is needed, 2 to 4 years. This is a facility we did in Washington State at Brady Trucking. My colleague Rick did this presentation for the SWANA, the Waste Expo. And this facility, we were able to drive it because we took an approach which went after all of the deadlines. We lined it up so that we could do it within an area that we knew was permitted correctly. And we had a lot of challenges with previous situations with different organizations and then COVID. But it was a homegrown company. It was small scale composting experience, and they had permits, but for a much smaller amount. And they had a lot of integrity, and that's number one. And they wanted to get a strong design team and permitting team in there. Had to go through, get the contract signed. The deadline was for less than 6 months. Uh, once the sale was done, we were doing this all before the sale was done and the contracts were done, brought for bringing in the material. And we identified the regulators, developed and strengthened the trust and engagement. We made sure it was an aerated system, made sure that it was covered so we can handle the extreme moisture in the area. And so we had a robust design. We had a pre-application meeting on site with the agencies that were mostly depended on to give the go-ahead on the project. And we got a good air consultant, someone who could model it, someone who knew the air authority and could say, yeah, this is their expected impact on the community. We met with the county commissioners, we met with the tribes, and we got the construction team part of this discussion. And then tried to be flexible, see every opportunity we could in the challenges that were put in front and addressing them quickly and on time. And then making sure that we got through each of these with complete communication to everyone. We had water issues come up at the site, and they said, you don't have access to water. Well, that's a problem. So a big pond was created as part of this for the reuse and recovery system. And we completed the construction actually concurrently, not with the permits in hand, but as we were getting the permits. There wasn't much drama. They got phase one developed at about half the total cost that was originally expected. And they were ready for phase two within a couple of years. This is what it looked like with buildings, air, and ponds. And have a trustworthy and trusting team and play well together in the sandbox. Make it easy for the regulators to say yes. Look at odor modeling. And can you do this? Yeah, but you have to do it for any one site to understand what's going on. So we used folks who knew how to do it. We had on our team someone who'd been doing this for decades of work in permitting. And also, we found out that the regulators really enjoyed engaging in this manner. The egos were set aside. We maintained transparency. We used science and engineering that was credible. And we had a good impact analysis. What he was quoted as saying is, Team Brady made it easy for us to say yes. And these are the things that you really need to look for and be committed to up front. So there's a lot of permit types out there in the market. My apologies for late start. We're on the end zone. We got 2 more sections to go through. Permit by rule is being done in many places, and or a general permit for like water, reaching your water, stormwater requirements. You might have a tiered or a risk-based level of composting. So you might want to be just underneath one level. That might be an advantage, but be prepared as you grow to be at that next tier up in your design. And then look at your organics disposal bans. Those are actually advantages for you, or if there's mandatory separation required, those are advantages that should play into the total cost in decision making. Do I want to do this or not? So every regulation is different. The U.S. Composting Council has a nice little website here that provides you a breakdown of permitting and legislation work that's gone on in different states. And of course, you need to check with your local jurisdiction if there's been any development of rules and requirements for your air board, for your water board, for your solid waste entity. So all of these can be overwhelming, but you will have to know them and build accordingly. So we're looking at the emission controls factors, that the emissions that might be generated, what control technology you're using for that, what permits and measurement approaches you're going to make to define and sustain those permits. In a solid waste permit, you're going to have an acceptance criteria. You're going to have some sanitation requirements for keeping your employees safe and, of course, the rest of the world safe. An odor impact management plan is almost always needed within a composting operation. And then for any water that you generate and collect, you're going to have treatment and reuse requirements. Some of the air permit conditions might include biofilters, ammonia scrubbing, compost covers, whether they're microporous membranes or positive aeration with a biocover. Your turning frequency might be part of this. It might include a required porosity and the size perhaps of what windrows you're going to be creating so they don't get too big for the technology you're using. You can look at misting systems for odors. Oxidizers can go in there, reactants, and even surfactants that make the odors drop out and adhere to moisture easily. You might have the modeling of the distribution of odors at different time. And then checking your source concentrations on a regular basis and perhaps your perimeter concentrations of odors using dilutions to threshold. So in an odor dispersion modeling, you're looking at being able to find structures or locations where you're emitting odors, and then the distance to different receptors. And you can see how dilution happens using air modeling. It's a good system to go in. It's done on a regular basis for many industries, and your local engineering firm should be able to refer you to someone who's good at that locally. And then look at whatever your local odor control requirements are first. There are no federal odor regulations, but there's some guidance. There's about 40 states that have some odor regulation, 44 states that have regulations in place. But quite honestly, you need some ways to approach that. And here's a list of the connections that you could use for finding out some of that information. If you have your solid waste permit, it's probably going to include some sort of rat, bird, or insect control. You're probably going to have some operational controls required. So on-time handling of the food waste, mixing, covering at a certain time of day, or managing it with air to keep that pH high in the first stages if it's food waste. And having backup equipment is typically required. And what procedures would happen if what you propose to be doing with that equipment doesn't work for some reason. You're also going to need to manage pathogens within this solid waste permit. Having good personal protective equipment, wash stations, laundry services, break rooms with hot soapy water, things like that. On water, you need to think you're likely to have a sealed surface and be able to collect areas that are going to be contaminated, and you should collect it and treat it with oxygen or aeration as quickly as possible so it would reduce odors. Store for reuse or disposal your water. If you do store it, aerate it. But if it's disposal, it's going to be typically a higher strength than what's normal. And if you're trying to discharge, you're going to go through some settling, aeration, and treatment. In fact, probably filtration before it's allowed to be discharged as stormwater, if it's allowed to at all. And there's going to be some overlap of your construction and final permit approvals. You might have to build it before you get your approval. That's scary. So understand the risks when you're going through these things and know the timing of approvals. And then we're going to look at your construction operational plan prep. Usually construction with concrete and buildings is going to be in the range of 6 to 9 months. And depending on where you're at, you might not be able to build during part of the year, so you got to get the timing right. And your operational permits could be initiated during construction or finalized during this construction time. Order your equipment early. Uh, you have deadlines and timelines for getting things that will not easily be available. So make sure you're 4 to 6 months ahead of whatever equipment you need, and make sure you've put your money down and you're committed, you're underway. Um, and then when it shows up, use the installation checklists, have the manufacturer show up, help train your first group of operators on this, look at the safety issues, and make sure that what has been installed is working from their perspective. And then when you're getting people going, you should be training them. During construction, if they're not actively involved in that, send them to Compost facility operator training. USCC or many state organizations have them. And also send them out for first aid training, safety training, any of the things you need for training on the equipment and what they're going to be required to do in their work environment. And also during this time, get your sales team on board and showing up at the different organizations and gatherings that go on for folks that will be the customers. Get known, talk about what's about to happen. And once you're there, they're going to have the contacts. They're going to be able to hit the ground running with materials and have them run tours so that your marketing folks really understand what you've done for the community with your facilities. And then during commissioning, have your equipment suppliers on site for the delivery, the installation. About 1 or 2 weeks is pretty good, but have material for them to work with. So it might be 2 trips. And if you guys have electrical and or other mechanical services in there that needs contractors, have them there during that time when those folks are there so they can make changes as needed so you can get through it quickly. And then finally, get your compliance under wraps. Your process engineer should be out there to train the people on how to operate it. They need to be training the mechanics, the company leadership, the permit compliance officers, believe it or not, and any of your feedstock suppliers and even your marketing agents. So everybody knows how this place is supposed to run. So it's not just hearsay, it's a coordinated team knowing how it's supposed to work. So if it's not working, that can happen. And finally, after startup, you're going to want to have your feedstocks coming in and then check in maybe in 3 months or 6 months that everything is working as it should. And just build those into your budgets, build those into the costs, and really fine tune it at that point. People will know what you're talking about a little bit more and what the challenges are. So fine tuning, go through at 6 months, check your product quality, make sure it's exactly what it needs to be, make the adjustments as soon as possible as you learn. At 9 months, you're turning your officials, showing them what's going on, and then making sure that your site plan is what you intended and that's working well. Or if not, make the changes sooner rather than later. And that is time for the Q&A. My apologies for the length of this.
Lengthy but thorough, Jeff. So thank you very much for that. Very excellent presentation. So we're going to do some Q&A now. So if you have any questions, please use the Q&A feature on your computer screen. We don't have any yet.
That's fine. Do you have any, Wayne?
No.
All right. It's a little overwhelming. The problem with doing a business plan is that you actually have to know what's going to happen. And if you haven't done it before, you don't really know. So check all the boxes that you can that we've covered in the presentation. Get as much information as you can. Put together a real business plan and try just messing with each of the different components and see what's going to happen if and what's going to happen then. And make sure that you've put those scenarios together, make multiples, say, you know what, this is where I'm conservative. I could go to the bank, show them what I'm planning to do. You can get your funding if you need it, and or your business partners, and dig in and make this real. To make it real is, you can start small and just learn all these lessons, or you can start in at the biggest possible size and just risk the the disaster that might happen. Really start small. If you have phase development, start small and build in increments. But there are certain tonnages. A minimum tonnage I would expect would be in the range of 30,000 to 50,000 tons per year, where it's easy to have several loaders, a grinder, screener, kind of all the big boy, big girl equipment that you can get in um, and say, "Yeah, I can buy new and make this pay off." Otherwise, you're going to start at a point where you're going to try to focus on used equipment and staged improvements on the property. One of the best companies out there, Dirt Huggers, they started just bootstrapping with little blowers and fans, and they just kept building and growing and developing the expertise internally. And it took them well, it took them a decade and a half actually, but they're now one of the bigger facilities in our region. So, and they've made steps to have good relationships with the regulators. So all of these things are important. It can be handled in a lot of different ways. If you can consciously think of how you want to manage the process, uh, and what you're committing to, and that you know you can afford to do it that way, then you're going to be successful in the business of composting.
Yeah, yeah, Jeff, I was just going to add that a lot of folks I see mostly are people that are in this business already. They might be just a mulch operation or yard waste only, and they want to add food waste to it. So they do have a track record and a client base, and maybe some good relationships with funding
Yeah.
institutions. So that's huge when you're proposing
But
something like this.
remember, these are big steps.
Yeah,
So I would go through the same plan, because you're likely to have to change your permit. You're likely to have to
yeah.
change your land use. As you expand into these things, you don't want to end up being surprised by something that blindsides you. So each of these components, I think, are important to you doing a good job of even stepping up and handling new feedstocks. I had one client started handling cheese whey, and had never handled that before. And there was a need, there was a decent income for it, but the problem was it makes a difference in your operation. They had to change from going from a turned windrow system to an aerated static pile system. And it required them to step up and change what was they originally thought to meet the needs of the material that they were handling.
There's a question here on communication. How do you go through communicating with neighbors? And do you have any lessons learned, stories to share about that topic?
So the one facility I built in the middle of suburbia, this was 1999. The the neighboring group had shut down an another composter at the other end of the airport. I was on one end, they were on the other. They really made foul odors, and they were shut down. They continued their septic pumping service, but they no longer put it in piles for the neighbors to smell. And they kept promising the neighbors, "Oh, we're going to get this window turner, and then all the odors are going to go away." They made all the classic mistakes in working with the neighborhood. And I had extremely irritated neighbors when I said, "I want to build a much bigger compost facility at the other end of the airport." And I early on, I did an in vessel system as a pilot. It wasn't a small pilot, but I built it, put it in place, and I went out to the community. I said, "Look, I'm going to have a meeting. I want to build a facility." I invited the regulators, who we had a relationship with, and the neighbors and the neighboring group that shut down that other one. And they all showed up with their arms crossed, and they all left with saying, "Oh, this really could work," because we were able to show them what it took to fully contain, use biofilters, and treat and manage the process so they wouldn't end up with being impacted again. And that facility's been running for 25 years. So go into that community, say, "This is what I'm going to do," but have a solid plan, a robust plan for how you're managing the things that you expect and they, in their mind and their imagination, fear you're going to do to them. So manage that, invest in that, do the business modeling up front. Don't decide what you're going to do without knowing how you're going to have to mitigate impacts. That's really my best advice is talk to them. Even if they're angry, if you're going to do the right thing, they're going to see it and they're workable. And there's going to be conditions. We had a progressive odor management plan that if we started creating odors, we do this on the next step, or we do that on the third step, or we do, and it got to the point where after about 10 steps in, yeah, we're going to stop receiving material because obviously we couldn't handle it with all the tools that were available to us. So I used to teach using a progressive odor management plan as a building tool for developing the confidence and the understanding that everybody is, we are here long term. If we create a problem, you tell us, we'll fix it this way. Well, why don't you do it all at the beginning? I might not need to. I might be a good enough operator where I don't create odors using what I feel is the, the appropriate management technology. But if I don't, this is what I'll do. And that came up to full enclosure and treatment and misting systems and all those things. That facility's still running today, and it's handling nasty feedstocks going into it. So, and it's got suburbia all around it. So it is workable. But if you're not working with them, they will work against you. So put out the word, invite them well before you submit for the permits, and then go to that next step and saying, okay, here's your formal, here's all the formal, this is where you can shut us down if you want to, and have those meetings. Ask the regulators to set those meetings up so that they become the arbitrators for what's going on. They can listen and ask you and make you do what's required.
Thank you. Here's a question. It's might be difficult, but I'll pose it anyway. Can you speak to the facility build out costs post COVID? Lots of types and sizes of facilities, uh, ag versus industrial, inside versus outside, uh, with some price ranges on the different options.
Nope. That's your job.
Yeah.
I can show you the tools. I can't build the rocket for you. Um, this okay. I'll give you an idea. Post COVID doesn't matter. It is our current economy. Whatever the economy is, that's what you got to deal with. Metal prices, tariffs, all these things make a huge difference. Fuel prices, and there's vast fluctuations. So have a robust business model that you model. Well, what happens if? What happens if? There's a lot less certainty. Do your work, get current prices. Don't wish that they were all cheaper. Land prices have been okay. So maybe take the time and build slowly, taking whatever is reasonably cheap in current market conditions and invest there and then build slowly over time. But I've always regretted delaying or stretching out construction because my models have to be updated to keep up with every new investment. I've started my house before COVID. I'm still not done. And it hurts right now because I thought what would be $200,000 for a place is now well over $500,000, and I'm not done yet. And that hurts. So, you know, I would say get a bank loan, get out there, know what your costs are, make those fixed costs that you can, fix them in place, and progress through and prove that your business has got enough tonnage coming in and can afford to pay off that investment. That's all I can say. I'm
Yeah.
sorry, it's not easy.
Yeah, I know equipment is definitely more expensive these days. Attending some demo days, they're way out there with prices and
1.5 million for
yeah,
the biggest, baddest grinder out there. I
yeah,
heard last year.
yeah. And the lead times are really long too when you order.
Yeah, and if they're available or not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Speaking of giveaways, are there any example Excel documents available for use that you showed with recipes, operating costs, etc.?
I actually built all of my own. I'd rather not share them, but
That's why he's in the business.
yeah, well, but it's not that. It's just that the nuances of putting together a good model that you understand how to use is what's important. Um, if you understand the basic things, you can definitely look at what I did. Please do, and try to say, "Oh, I got to keep track of that." And a good accountant, good financial person should be able to put those models together for you. But if you want to do it yourself, use mine as a first start and do better. Every time I do an Excel spreadsheet and send it out to someone else, it improves. So you can ask AI to put one together for you, perhaps, if AI knows what business you're actually trying to tackle.
Yeah. And speaking of that, these presentations are made available. So you just email Jeff at compostingtechnology.com,
Mhm.
and he will send you the slide decks. And uh,
It's a big monster. I will try to shrink it down. It'll be in a PDF format. And will you have it available also, Wayne?
um, we have the recordings,
Okay.
but we can. I have copies here, so if you request to, I can send them to you also. So
Okay.
yeah.
All right.
All right. So we're going to wrap it up. Again, this is thank you again, Jeff and Galen and Megan, who got you here. I appreciate them helping out and assisting with this, and three great presentations and a lot of information. Hopefully, you folks will uh, get some good information out of it. So, we're going to close. And again, thanks for attending, and we'll see you next month. Next month's webinar is on metals recycling commodities and an update. See what the impact of the tariffs are on some commodities. So, hope to see you
Yeah.
then.
Might
All
be
right.
good news.
Yep.
Thanks.
Thank you.